Dr. J, are you ready for me? I'm just going to do a quick intro again, a short version. This man is obsessed with innovation. He is a serial entrepreneur, and he's talking about cracking the code, the spend personality algorithm in action. Welcome to the stage. We're so excited to learn from you. He is also the founder of ecosystem.Ai. Please let's give a warm round of welcome.
Thank you. So when I'm in Africa, I'm Jay van Zyl. When I'm in the US, I'm Jay van Zyl. So welcome to Spend Personality. But the idea is to give you a quick glimpse of the research work we've been doing in human behavioral sciences in transactional related systems. So you might know this when you use your music app, when you use your digital app, when you use most of what you have access to today in your digital stack. There are behavioral algorithms tracking, nudging, changing, and dynamically altering how you engage with these various channels. And I want to give you a glimpse of how we've been using some of those algorithms in the context of our financial services. So the way we measure success is through what's called use cases. And for those in the AI world, in an artificial intelligence world rather than augmented intelligence, means that you have a particular problem that you want to solve. You have a prediction story. So I want to predict X from Y, or I want to nudge a person in a certain way for a certain benefit. And we measure our success based on how many of these we can implement and how many of these we can run continuously. So we work with a number of companies across the continent, and especially large-scale telcos and banks. And these are embedded, and we're running experiments to see how you can adjust various kinds of behaviors in the positive kind of sense. Okay, so the journey is going to be fairly quick, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of what it looks like and also where you can go find examples. We do have various open source stacks that we've now published that are available for some of the algorithms. So if anybody is interested, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and we can share some of those with you. There are a number of behavioral papers now published as well on what we call the sentimental equilibrium. And that means the ways in which we find a dynamic in which we can alter our behaviors when we connect with various kinds of customers. So let's just give you 2 or 3 bits of context. The first bit of context is that the world of cognition and the world of any kind of intelligent automation is pretty rife with technologies. If you had to go search for behavioral recommenders or behavioral algorithms, you're probably going to find that there are thousands of companies available to you. So this is an incredibly crowded, very noisy space, and it's very difficult to figure out what this thing called the self-aware algorithm really is all about. Now, in banking and in financial services or in any space where there's a transaction, what we've been working on is trying to superimpose computational related social science algorithms on top of those data points and then find out what we can extract from the human behavior. And that means that we're working on this, what's called unsupervised context-aware based algorithms. That's really our primary specialization. So a bit more context. If you think of the world of digital interaction, and this is kind of a grossly simplified slide, but if you can bear with me, you got a person that is 18 or 80. When they go and purchase food, or they put in fuel in their motor car, or they pay for a haircut at a shop on the side of a street, the transaction itself is a bit of evidence of an action that was taken by a human in the system. If it is human being present or not present, obviously you can make certain assumptions. If there's money flowing in and out, there are an enormous amount of human behavioral characteristics that you can extract from that normally is not really looked at, we find in many institutions, and especially in the fintech world, where this is a very, very primary focus of competitiveness. So this just shows that the relationship need increases as the complexity of the interaction increases. And the point is that can you find ways to interact with people and to essentially incentivize them and guide them down a route, especially if you're going to deal with financial wellness or anything related to that space. So like in South Africa that knows places like Discovery Bank or some of those, we've worked with some interesting companies in working on how you can bring behavioral algorithms into the space of engagement. So the basis is that spend is used as evidence in the context of how are we going to determine your personality. So if you think about it this way, the difference between a social scientist and a computational social scientist is that a computational social scientist does not believe anything you say. It doesn't do interviews. You don't speak to humans. You don't engage with any human in a physical, biological sense at all. You only deal with the abstract representation of that human's persona as they conduct their life on a day-by-day basis. So that means the digital footprint that they leave behind, banking or insurance or the driving or whatever you can track from a data point of view forms then a basis of what you can then use to encourage them or to drive some outcome. So the use case and how these use cases fit together is something like this. The first thing you have to do is you have to figure out how you're going to categorize a person's life. And you probably know this already. So when you go spend money at a food outlet or you buy from a certain fuel provider or whatever it might be, there's a category associated with that. And there's already some evidence of some of the things that you are doing. And we've all been doing that for a pretty long time. In actual fact, it's pretty embedded. Most systems already have that in place. But the augmentation of how you extract behavior from that is what you need to have some theoretical construct on, and I'll share that with you. The next thing is you want to be able to determine a behavior. And as you know, humans are never static. A human is a continuously changing biological system that is nudged and is fed certain things and changes its lifestyle in some ways from the point where it gets issued that receipt to say you're welcome to the point where it gets you are done. There's a lifelong augmentation of data that can be used to determine how humans operate and what they do. And that means that we want to get to a point where you can activate humans as they go through various stages of their lives. And eventually you can apply it for commercial sense. And the big part that we've been involved in that's been really quite fortunate is especially wellness-related programs. How can I deal with making sure that I only give you what you can afford, what you should afford? If I see that there's trouble, can I assist you? And how do I drive an interaction that get that person from one state to another? So this is what it then looks like if we start building this out into some kind of stack or a way in which you can implement this. The first thing is you have to understand how you're going to use the demographic and the behaviors and how you're going to abstract those behaviors to make sure that it is done consistently and you can apply it across all of the interactions. You want to be able to have the difference between a money and a spend personality. You want to know if the person is conducting their life in a certain way and how they are doing that, and especially when it comes to debt, or it comes to something like, if you think about persons that get into early delinquency, or the way in which they conduct their payments, or whatever that might be, all of those form part of understanding the behaviors. And then what you want to do later on is use that to activate and eventually to nudge and to find other means by which you can engage with these people. So I'm going to be talking about that gray block only today. So I'm going to give you a glimpse of what the spend personality looks like. Okay, so here's a use case example. The gray block on the left is if you know nothing about somebody, and this is maybe a more digital or an app-based example, but it could be a web, it could be an agent, it could be some kind of interface, it could be a USSD session, it could be whatever the interaction is that the person is doing a transaction on. But the first thing is that I know nothing about you. So that means that you've not identified yourself. All I know is that you come in at a certain time, a certain place, and you're performing a certain set of actions. What I want to do is make sure that my linguistic augmentation, so that means that my large language model-based implementation and the guardrails for what I put in place is directly in line with what I can observe about people like you, because I don't know anything about you yet. The moment you identify yourself, you then have an understanding as to who the person is. And if you think of in financial services, the act of checking your balance is habitual activity. It's a bit like in the mobile phone networks we found. So we've got a client with 100 million customers. We run 10 million experiments per day, and people check their balances all the time, even though they know that it might not have changed. They go back to the app, and it's a complete lost opportunity, because in that moment, you can help them, guide them, promote certain products, you can figure out what is going on in their lives, and that's when you start understanding what you're going to recommend or how you're going to get the person down a journey that is successful for hopefully you and for them. And then eventually what you want to do, you want to get to a point where you got what we call hyper-personalization, or just for you, or whatever you want to call that kind of concept. So the other part of how you use this could be inside your organization. So here's an example of how an agent sits on the phone with one of their customers, and you know that you've got a persona, and the persona is somebody that you want the customer to become like. And that is the person that you want to activate. As you ask the question, let's say they don't know anything about the spend personality, they can ask questions about it, and it gives them answers. If you want to do this yourself, you can go to ChatGPT, custom GPTs, you just search for ecosystem.AI. You see we've published a whole lot of these publicly. It's for free. You can go try them out, get cases configured and the like. So what you want to do is that you want to make sure that if something needs to be exact and precise, you want to not use the language model. You want to bring the result from, in this case, a spend personality goes and calculates the person's behaviors, understand the scores on a spectrum, and those gets morphed into the content. So when you then ask a question about a certain customer, you know that the answer is only for them. It's not something that is going to hallucinate or is going to come up with something that is not necessarily true, and it brings it all together. So in this case, it's asking for two customers. The one customer is what you want this person to become, or the person on the phone who's an agent speaking to, in this case, the person asking a question. Now, typically what will happen is you see how slow this rendition is. What happens is that you pre-configure these so that they will be pre-created with pre-prompting, we call it. So that comes up instantaneously, but still can be done through either a voice-to-text interface or a normal chat. And then you can ask it to generate certain graphing and everything on the fly. So you could give it a certain specification and say, I want a pie chart, a bar graph, I want a radar, I want whatever it is, and it generates it in line. So that means that it'll take the data, don't come up with data that's outside of this context, and make sure that it eventually gets into whatever the interface is that you're busy setting up. The other thing about this is that the knowledge base that sits behind the research is that the entire research base is used to make sure that the model only gives answers within the guardrail. So if you ask it about a certain kind of spend personality, like an experiential personality, and you ask it without the guardrail, it comes up with quite an elaborate, inventive answer, and every time you ask it, it's going to come up with a different answer. Where in this case, you can ask it to compare and to see how you can drive strategies between different kinds of people based on what the scores are that were allocated to them in the context of an algorithm that runs on the actual transactions. So you're not taking the intelligence from the language model to be able to come up with the answers. The answers actually come from an algorithm that does the work, and you morph it into the linguistic interface that translates it into the human who's going to be using it. Okay, so there's concepts called RAG and the like. For those who are in the LLM world will know that how you could access this. But the point is that the spend personality and the many personalities and so on are fully implemented in this context, so people can implement it in their own environments. And then you can ask it to make recommendations based on the ones that we have found kind of historically already. Okay, so that's kind of some of the use cases. One is outward facing, one is inward facing. So one is facing towards the staff in your business, and one is facing your client or your customer or the person on the ground, either performing a transaction or in any other kind of engagement that you want to track over time. So the challenge is this. Let me give you kind of a 6-step process. The first thing is you have to understand the challenge around the data versus no data problem. If a customer has never done a transaction with you, or they've only done one transaction per week, it means that your rate of learning is incredibly low. You cannot take just that one transaction into account. So that means that you need to find a model that is already prepared that you can go score against to understand based on that person's demographic what their personality could be. So that means that you want a model approach to make sure that you can take from data that you've learned, customers that you've already engaged with, and you can engage with new people with the model. You also want to be able to run experiments to say that if I know that you are a person that is normally intentional, and I use intentional language, intentional products that I offer to you, I'll sometimes want to test if you are experiential. So that means that I want a dynamic model. And in some cases, I want to use a pure cold start. That means that it's entirely dynamic, and it figures out on the fly who you are. And it needs to then adjust over time and converge the model on your behavior as I get you to do certain things. Because I want you, as an example, if you don't spend money on food, does that mean you're not eating? No, it means you're spending it with somebody else. So what can I do to get you to spend food with me? Once you spend food, and I see you spend food on this side of town and that side of town, I know that you must be traveling, but you're not spending money on travel. So how am I going to get you to spend with your travel? And if I see that you travel, and you travel in a way where you spend it 10 minutes apart and it's 1,000 kilometers away, I know that you're probably flying, so that means I need to offer you, you get the picture. So that means that you track the data and the behaviors, and you eventually can get it all done. Then you have to pick an app, and here's the spend personality. You can get it from your favorite cloud provider. It sits in the marketplace, and you can go run it as an adjacency and then set it up. But you need an architecture that can do this for you. It's not something you're just going to go and get out of the box. You need a way in which you can have a real-time environment that if somebody touches the app, you want to be able to determine what the text is that you're going to use, what the background color is, what the sequence of whatever is going to be used if it's an app. If it's a USD device, what the actual language is, what the price is on the fly. You want to be able to do things in real time, and you want to be able to do things in an offline fashion. And you kind of need an architecture that can help with your data science team and your technical teams to implement this. And then you need to have some data if you do have some. And in most cases, if you start this journey, you need to have a customer. You need to have some name, some details about the person. And if you do have transactional data, you can take both those into account. So that means that you can take the transactional data and the customer demographic data, you morph it all in, and the algorithms are applied and then calculate a series of outcomes, including a thing called entropy. So that means, have I learned enough about your behaviors by taking these data points into account? And you can track all of this. It's all part of the app that you install. And then lastly, what you want to do is once you have that job run and you've done your pipeline, you want to expose this content either through a data feed that one of your teams are going to be using, or your analytics team are going to be able to augment into your dashboarding, or you bolt it straight into an API that can be used by your payment switch or by, and in actual fact, we've seen clients even using it to determine fraud-related characteristics or other kinds of behavioral characteristics that you can use the real-time engine for. Okay, so that's kind of a glimpse of the steps that you would normally follow to get something like this implemented. The part that is not in the steps, by the way, is that just add 20 years of behavioral research and the fun of it and some computational social science and behavioral economics and throw that in a pot, and then it's easy. So here's an example of a recent study that we did. What we wanted to understand were the rituals for a South African entity. And I've got one or two for Kenya, and I've got for one or two other African countries, but let's use this as the example for now. What you could see is that there are major rituals in a region like this that happens normally around April and then in December. Like in the US, you got Thanksgiving and you got 4th of July, and so you got a very different ritual per region that normally affects your spending. And it also affects your insurance behavior. It affects all of your credit behavior. It's completely predictable once you look at that society as a social system. When you take that social system and you work out the pulse, we call it the client pulse responder. It means that how are you going to respond to that particular person's pulse? If you know that every April they travel and leave the country, and every December they stay at home, and every certain number of months they move to the coast for a few months to work, or whatever that might be, all of those behaviors become part of your intelligence that then gives you input into how you're then going to track the behavior. So the analytic, you want to have dashboards that can track your generics, what type of product, how often they spend, where they spend it, those kind of things. But you want to be able to know, based on the categories, where they are doing what they're doing, and you then want to start applying certain features that you already have. So you want to know the age, you want to know the certain income bracket, the profession, and as you know, in a lot of regions, we don't have any of that data. A lot of that data is imputed based on what the person is spending. So it depends on what you have access to and what you don't. What you then want to be able to do is to deal with, especially the bottom left score, and that is called entropy. And entropy, in this case, in the context of information sciences, is have I learned enough about you? And in the top right is around your spend category, and how it specializes in the context of changes over time, and do you have a certain spread of people spending on certain things. And then this is just an example of product preferences. So then, if you then want to zoom in on certain customers, and what we've seen customers do is that they create personas, and the persona is what you want a target market to look like. So you translate your segmentation into a target. So here's a classical example. The top left is what's called experiential. Experiential means that the person always try out new things. They like to spend sporadically. They spend across many different places. And you know that they are excited about the variety of what they're doing. The intentional is exactly the opposite. They only want to do things once or twice. They do it highly ritualistically. They only spend on that same transaction every week, and that's it. And you can see these differences quite vividly. And then, I don't have an expanded view of the top right end, but you want to be able to understand the event flows. And the event flows gives you the customer's lifespan. It tells you how they're changing over time and where all of their behaviors are going. So by the time you create the spectrum for a particular customer, and you want to use that for some kind of insightful research, you can start seeing how the different personalities influence that person based on the actions that you took. So that means what kind of product, what kind of branding, what kind of outbound campaigning, what kind of fraud's happening, and you can map it back onto your personalities. And here's kind of an example. Is that the dotted line that you see there is an intervention? And in this case, what you wanted to do is see the personality drift. I wanted to move somebody from an intentional to an experiential. So I want to get the person who is only spending on one or two categories essentially over time, and I want him to start spreading their spend. And I want to see if it's working. So what you do is you track them through this mechanism. So you could see that as the entropy goes down, and I learn more about the person, so that means it gives me insight into what they're doing, I can then start seeing which strategies are working under what kind of condition. So for the sake of time, I'm going to give you a very quick view of this, a glimpse of this, and then for those who are interested, contact Zeli or get hold of me on LinkedIn and I can share the material with you and you can have a look at it. You want to be able to understand how the behaviors shift and how they relate to your particular data sets. You want to be able to construct a personality algorithm, and we've got a couple of published views on this that you can have a look at. You want to be able to track what's called the interaction personalities. So think about it, when you use Pinterest, or you use your music app or your digital app, and you touch that screen, the moment you touch it, it knows that it's busy tracking your behavior and it needs to decide if it's going to make it more or less exciting. If you do not engage, it needs to make it more exciting because it sees that you're not activating, you're browsing, you're scrolling. The moment you click, you activate. Yes, I've learned something about you. This is what the algorithm typically looks like when we start designing it and calibrating it for a company. And you can then work out where that gets used to see how you can drive engagement in whatever the platform is that you play. This is kind of examples what intentional looks like, experiential looks like, enthusiastic looks like. This is the person that clicks on every banner, do a number of applications halfway, browse in there, balance twice a day. They're always in there, but they do nothing. They basically, the action that they take is just looking at what's there. And we've sometimes seen that double-digit part of your customer base often are just there to be entertained, but you do nothing. You just keep it the same. So how do you then drive novelty to these kind of communities? And that's what the design looks like. Anyway, we're not going to have time today to talk about it. But let's just then think about getting going. What you want to do is understand how you can categorize your customer's life, understand a theoretical view of what you've learned from the data, and you need to have some kind of personality. For those who are interested, go look at how Spotify and some of these companies have published all their music and listening personality, usage personalities from Meta, and so on. So we definitely see that in the AI world, the concept of the personality is very precise and accurate about your behaviors. And the linguistic world in AI is about how we leverage that to make it sensible to people who can engage with it. And that means you can have a number of different cases that you can apply on the back of this understanding. And you want to be able to have a technical stack that runs in parallel to your current stack. You don't want to go and augment everything that you're doing. You want to be able to run it, test it. If it doesn't work, you want to switch out to different algorithms and try different things rather than having to worry about these complex integration pieces. Anyway, so that's kind of just in a nutshell the spend personality. Any questions? He's running.
Hello. Do you usually base it off some minimal base points to determine these personalities? Because some instances you'd find that it reinforces based on your initial behavior and then sort of like categorizes you to a certain personality. And so, for example, if you're looking at targeted marketing, then you end up getting the same things over and over again, but
yes,
actually it's not really linked to your personality in essence.
Yeah, I can give you maybe just a short answer to a complex problem that you kind of raising. The base is that we've got base transformers pre-trained that essentially have got embedded the base understanding of the behavioral science, including the calibration points around certain human activities. So the human activity around travel and food and the like are all in our base models. You then have change models on top of that. That means what we call adjacencies that you can implement, and you can calibrate what you want that to be. So that means that if you're an organization that, let's say you got an airline payments card, or like with M-Pesa, we've seen it when people spend money at less than 100 shillings, whatever it might be. You want to create certain personas and personalities that are just for that band, because you know they're only going to spend within a very narrow category group, but you still want to have an incentive program and a language model on the back of that. So that means how you're going to talk to them and how you're going to offer products to them. You can then calibrate that. And then the third layer is the layer where you then continuously make sure that you understand how all your segments behave in whatever way they're behaving. So we normally see that if you think of, at various income groups, like the wealth segment versus the middle tier segment, and then various types of what we call the mini pyramids, you have very similar behaviors in a person that owns a tiny shop and a person that owns a big enterprise. You have similar, but the thing is you want to take the learnings and start bridging them across those areas. And there's a way in which you can configure that, and also how you can augment it. Yeah. And then if you've got a data science team, there are Python APIs, just for those who are interested. And the whole thing, you can just then access it, and you can calibrate and work within that environment if you want to. Yeah. Oh, there's one more. You see, I had my stopwatch going, so I think I did 21 minutes. So it was
Hi, mine is a quick one. Are you the reason why we get a lot of calls from insurance companies knowing specifically the product that they want to sell through to you? And secondly, how do you get paid?
No, so I think we might have partners who use our product for outbound activity. But if I look at probably our biggest outbound client on the continent is Vodafone. It's all inbound. So that means that the way in which you use it is by the time I already have identified you and you already expressed a need for something. So the outbound campaigning is a separate class of problem. Because the outbound campaigning is that if somebody buys a list, like in many of the regions across the African continent, you can buy regional lists. These lists are completely blind. So it's just a mobile number with maybe some augmented attributes depending on what you paid for the list, and you just put those into a dialer and they go out. And people have been trying time of day, day of week, and as you know, we all have got Truecaller. You want to block those. So that's definitely something that you want to think about when you use anything that's got a digital interaction. What we're talking about is by the time I know that you're busy engaging. So that means that you already show cognition to want to do something. Then you can really apply the algorithms properly. To just do it blindly is pretty costly. I mean, we had a client, the one that I do know about, they run 3-4 million outbound in Europe, and when you look at the results that come back, you could see that the uptakes are like 1%. And you can try 3 different algorithms and it stays within 1%. It's a different class of problem. You had a second part of your question?
How do you get paid?
How do you get paid?
Maybe how much?
Me. I've got a credit card device here. Oh, okay. Right, everybody. Thank you. Thanks. One more question.
Dr. van Zyl. I wanted to just a quick question. We talked earlier on about the need for large amounts of data for the continent. Have you in your networks discussed that and how we could do that? Because a lot of the data comes from the Western countries, USA, Europe, and so forth.
No, that's a great question, and I think that the thing around our US office and the focus that we have in the kind of North American or even the European space is very different than we have in the various pockets across the African continent. But that means that if you work with retailers, and that's why you see that there have been deals done between retailers, telecommunication companies, banks. The thing that I think people are trying to get to are essentially the basket points. So if we can get to a level where every single person can have a certain category and subcategory recorded at a merchant level and the like, you'll be able to collect data at a very, very different cycle than you're doing at the moment. So we've only been working in the regulated frameworks within our clients, and then in some cases we take public data. And what we found though is that, and if you think about a typical person's behavior, even when they perform digital payments, anywhere, You don't go pay for food and then tweet about it or X about it, or go into some travel in the airport and then go and put it onto your Instagram and you go. So that means that your digital media is a very false representation of the person. So the reason why we've been working with spending data, spending is true, it's accurate, it's there, it's validated, and we know that you, the person, if you were there, or if it's not even card present, you performed that action. If it's fraudulent, obviously then it could show up different signs about the person, but you know everything the person is doing exactly. So those data points, I think, are incredibly important, and we've been working within that framework only. But I think there are campaigns. We are busy with telcos and so on, working on additional data collection, but I think it is difficult. Yeah, it is tough. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Ciao.